think it's in Arizona and Utah.
We good to go, Mr. Hood? Good afternoon. It is Monday, December 2 at 3:38. Apologize, I needed to get my glasses. First item, this is the regular meeting, the Transportation Committee, or Commission, excuse me. First order of business is roll call. Ballard is here, albeit late. Kenny? Here. Ryan Lancaster?
Here.
Ryan Hall? Here. Tracy Hopkins?
Here.
Stephen Lewis?
Here.
Ryan Leslie?
Here.
Tom LeClaire? Absent. Joseph Leckie?
Here.
Did I get that right, Mr. Leckie?
Yes.
Okay. Luke Kavanagh does not appear to be with us. Sean Martin? Absent. Tony Tisdale?
Here.
Good afternoon. Ian Updike?
Here.
Alyssa Taysom?
Here.
Justin Price? Okay. Second item is the adoption of the agenda, and let me make a note. I had observed a loose practice of asking if there were additions or deletions or comments on the agenda. I stand corrected on that. If we are to make an amendment to the agenda or to add items, it needs to be previous to the meeting so that it can be properly noticed. These notices do go out to the public, so if anyone's attending. So that was a point of protocol that was brought to my attention, and I appreciate that, Mr. Baird. So, but again, and I see correspondence between the commissioners on occasion asking to add items, and if we keep that requirement in mind, we'll get those on the agenda and properly before. Okay, adoption of the agenda. Would ask if any corrections there as it is stated.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we adopt the agenda as written.
Okay, got a motion by Mr. Hopkins to adopt the agenda as stated. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Lewis. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. 2 is closed. Introduction of new youth commissioner, Joseph Leckie. Mr. Leckie, as it is our custom here, we give a new member a few minutes to introduce themselves and tell the rest of the commissioners a little bit about yourself. I've looked at your resume and see that you have some broad experience. You were thinking to get on the solid waste advisory, but recycling, transportation is kind of related, but in any event. So with that, Mr. Leckie, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself.
So my name is Joseph Leckie. I'm a sophomore at CUNA High School, but I actually live here in Meridian.
Oh, you broke it. It's first day you broke it.
Okay. I think it's fine. Okay, so I've been participating in MIAC for the last couple months and really enjoyed it, and that's how I learned about the youth opportunities on commissions. So I thought that would be a really good opportunity for me to learn a bit more about how the Meridian city government operates and hopefully give me an opportunity to impact it and help my community as a whole. I had initially hoped to be on the transportation committee, but I switched that to the solid waste committee partway through because we were going to try and do a recycling related proposal in MIAC, but that got canceled, so the transportation committee would have actually been my first pick.
Very good. Well, politically astute, I might add. Fellow commissioners, any questions for Mr. Leckie? If not, appreciate you joining us and wish you well as a sophomore. That's interesting. You've got a couple more years ahead of you. Okay. Item 3, approval of the minutes, the November 4th, 2019 meeting, excuse me. Mr. Lewis, I didn't see anything. Did you?
I found one thing, Mr. Chairman,
Okay,
on page 11,
page 11.
under item 4E, fixed route transit planning.
Yes,
In that first paragraph, third line from the bottom, it says on activates. I think it should be on activities.
third line, Brighton, MDC, and others.
I'm sorry?
Proposed schedule
Oh.
is provided.
I'll schedule that one also, yeah, so there's two on that, in that line.
Oh, proposed schedule was provided to the commission on activities. We need an I there.
Yes, please.
Okay. One vowel, that won't cost you much,
I'd like to spin the wheel, Pat.
okay? I note for the record that Mr. Kavanagh has joined us. Welcome, sir.
Apologies for my tardiness.
Now, you had 8 extra minutes. I had to go find my glasses. Okay, besides the vowel, any other changes on the minutes?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the minutes as amended.
Okay,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Mr. Hood, I'll interline that. Put an I there and sign the minutes. If I may, Mr. Lancaster, on page 11 of the minutes, top paragraph, carryover paragraph, bottom line talks about separated pathway or sidewalk. Is that an item for future discussion for us? Caught my attention what we were going through.
You're asking, so Mr. Chairman, you're asking me if that's an item for future agenda?
We had quite a discussion with Mr.
Wasdall?
Wasdale, and I just, in my mind, I was just asking if we had satisfied his inquiry or if there was information yet to be considered.
I do remember that conversation. I also remember that I didn't participate actively in that particular agenda item. I don't know. I think, Mr. Chairman, that would be a question better asked of Mr. Wasdall than me, I guess.
Okay, well, I apologize. Mr. Lewis, you got a comment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we did discuss how in our recent Eagle Road study, we had an 8-foot planter strip between the edge of the road and the sidewalk, and that was driven more by the city of Boise requirement to have a minimum 8 feet if you're going to plant street trees. I don't think that the city has a particular width for their planter strips beside that I'm aware of.
So without Mr. Wasdale being here, I think we answered his question for the most part, but let's save that to another day if we may. Okay. Thank you for the interruption. With that, we have the November 4 minutes approved. Old business transportation projects update, Mr. Hood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. So on page 15 of your packet begins the transportation projects update memo. I don't have a whole lot of bold items this month, and that's mainly because I asked ACHD what's going on. A lot of the information that I provide on project updates comes from the highway district. In the last several months, they haven't been sending me that update. So I inquired as to maybe there's a change in staff or whatever. But anyway, so there's not a whole lot of information. I did go to some of the most current projects and see if I could find some information. Some of it I think is just because it's the time of year. There's not a whole lot of construction, ramping up for construction. There's a lot of bidding going on and a lot of things that are actually utility relocates and things like that. And to contradict what I just said, on that first page, Meridian Road Charity Use Stick construction is going to start here today. So if you, this northern segment just north of Cherry Fairview, that is going to be a construction zone. So heads up on that. So there are construction projects still occurring even through the winter, but there's just not a whole lot of updates that I have for you this month in the packet. In fact, I think they're just shared vehicles on page 21, and that's a separate agenda item, so I'm not even going to talk about that one. So I think with just that one highlight on the Meridian Road project, we'll talk about a couple of other of these, again, under separate title on your agenda. But unless there's any questions, I'm going to kind of let the memo speak for itself.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Hood? Seeing none or hearing none, 5A will be closed for today's session. Item B, default speed limit follow-up, Randy Spywak. Welcome again, Mr. Spywak. Did I have it correct?
Speedwax, close enough.
Spywak? Okay, I'll sneak that long E in there then.
Yeah.
Okay, Spywak. Sir?
Yes, Randy Spiewak. I live in 1458 East Loyalty Street in Meridian, just off of Locust Grove. Last month, I presented to you just an idea, a proposal to consider taking to City Council a reduction of our residential street speed limits, making the default 20 miles an hour rather than 25. And I gave mostly observations and anecdotal data, answered questions. A couple of the members on the commission requested statistical information and any observed research or any research I could find. So I put all that together. I offered to do that. And what you have in front of you is a printed copy of what I'll go over. And we've got a PowerPoint. Does this go on, Caleb?
Touch it, Randy, sorry. Touch it and see if it goes on.
That's okay, I can just go from paper. I don't know if it's on their screens or not. Well, we can still do it from paper. This is a proposal that Meridian residential street speed limits be reduced to protect pedestrians, citizens of Meridian, and to reduce serious injury and reduce potential fatalities from traffic accidents affecting, including a pedestrian. The preface was kind of interesting. Idaho is ranked 7th lowest in the nation with the number of pedestrian fatalities, as you might expect. We're a smaller state, but we're 2nd lowest per 1,000, which is even better. 2nd lowest in the nation of number of pedestrian fatalities in the nation. And I tried to ask myself, was there an obvious reason why? I will say I got quite a bit of help from Sergeant Frazier with the police department, a little bit of help from ITD, and help from Caleb's counterpart at the city of Boise and city of Nampa, who directed me, gave me a lot of areas to look at to get research for you. So is it due the 20, that we currently have 20 mile an hour residential speed limit in the majority of residential population in this state? Both Boise and Nampa have had 20 mile an hour speed limits for their residential populations for almost 70 years, 1949 and 1952. In fact, Caleb's counterpart in Boise, young lady there that I spoke to, was surprised. She said, "Oh, I thought the whole state was 20. No, state code says 25 unless a city or a municipality takes upon themselves to have a speed slower than that. So anyway, I wanted to look at why is Meridian still 25? Was there a reason? And would lowering the speed limit to 20 be any safer? Would there be fewer pedestrian injuries and maybe fewer or no pedestrian fatalities? Though, quite honestly, we are very low already. Supporting data. This was the information that I pulled by researching predominantly the internet and help from the two cities. Between 2008 and 2019, U.S. drivers struck and killed almost 50,000 pedestrians. That's 13 per day, more than one every hour and 46 minutes. I thought that was kind of a striking piece of information. Number two, between 2008 and 2017, pedestrian deaths increased by 34%. At the same time, the number of miles driven across the United States was estimated at only an 8% increase, so that there was less miles driven, but a considerable increase in pedestrian deaths. Walking as a form of transportation increased only 1%, so that meant more people who were walking before were involved in accidents. So it wasn't like there was a lot more people walking, just more accidents. And the number of occupant deaths in vehicular accidents actually decreased over 6%. So it was the area that had the most significant change was pedestrian fatalities. If you flip back to the first colored page, you'll see that chart that I found and data that I pulled that shows the 35%. Next item, pedestrian fatalities, 76% are urban, which you would kind of expect, 24% rural. Didn't think that was anything significant. We would assume that it would be more urban than rural. Next. And this is the data you see here that supports that. It also looked at accidents that were at intersections versus just people crossing in neighborhoods between homes, and whether there were more accidents in daylight or nighttime hours on this information that I received. Next page. And one more. 82% of the accidents involving pedestrians are not at intersections. And you'd wonder why. That's where you think the most of the traffic would take place, crossing at lights where there are crossing devices. That's where the accidents don't take place. They take place not at intersections, but at residential and commercial streets within our communities. Just crossing streets, but not at corners. Next. The pedestrian fatality rate by speed limit. I was recommending, you were at the right place. Recommending we go from 25 to 20, so I was looking to see what other municipalities have 20-mile-an-hour speed limits, and what is the change in statistics for those that are slower. The state ITD web car, or car web database, I was hoping would give a lot of information. I spent 2 days trying to get someone with transportation department to give me access, couldn't. So I asked the help of our police department, Sergeant Frazier, who couldn't make it here today, he was here last month. He did his best to get on and was having trouble, though he did admit that the majority of that information is state, federal, and county highways, not residential highways. And the only time residential data was input is if someone decided to update the record. So it was primarily from county, state, and federal roads. But he did have an idea that there might be some data that he could get that would look at residential streets by county. May not be able to get it and split out Boise, Meridian, Nampa, other municipalities in the state. If this goes forward beyond the commission, he's going to keep looking and seeing if he can get access to that data and would get it back to me. So if you take a look, you can see that local streets is where the majority of accidents do take place. Next.
Mr. Spiewak?
Yes.
If I may interrupt. Local streets. Within this percentile, is there a breakdown of streets that are posted at 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45?
We're going to get to that one in a second.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay, I didn't see it. Go ahead, excuse me.
That's what I was struggling most to get, was where you saw that change take place. And there's not a lot of data out there nationally. All right, pedestrian rate by vehicle speed. This starts to speak to what you're asking. This one only showed at 20 miles an hour the fatality rates. And then see, look at the jump when it hits 30. 30 at 45%. If someone is hit going 30 miles an hour, there's a 45% chance of a fatality. At 20 miles an hour, a 5% chance. At 40 miles per hour, an 85% chance of death. A pedestrian hit by a car or a truck. Next. This was the key one. This was why I looked quite a bit, and I finally found this data, and it shows by speed miles per hour, a vehicle hitting a pedestrian, where does the change take place? 5, 10, 15, 20, it's nil, but look what happens at 25. There was the jump. Okay, next. I wanted to get some, try to find regional information. There is none in Idaho that is available on the internet. None of our cities or counties or the state post any kind of statistics. Utah does have, and they repeat this every year, the Utah crash facts. And what was interesting is that I think it was the year prior to this, one of the statements was that pedestrian crashes were 11 times more likely to result in death than any other vehicular facility of fatalities. So pedestrians 11 times greater than car to car, car to truck. Then next, I looked in the region and I found city of Portland. Portland has already adopted a 20-mile-an-hour residential speed limit, and it was interesting. I called over there and talked to one of the folks on city manager's staff, and they actually had while their equivalent of RACHD was going to be changing signs and that, the city went out and you can see a picture of just it looks like a campaign sign. And neighborhoods were posting these all over, 20 is plenty, similar to what our subdivision did, and was one of our homeowners came up with the 20 is plenty. Maybe he used to live in Portland, but this is what Portland did, and they had those out during the whole time period when their county highway department was changing signs from 25 to 20, and then after they finished up, they collected them all up. But Portland has been pretty successful. They did this based on bicycle accidents more than pedestrian. And the data I have here, pedestrian included the bicycle. They didn't call those vehicles. Those were vehicles with engines, motorcycles, cars, trucks. Next. United States Department of Transportation recommends, you have a guideline that says slower speed limits in school zones and neighborhoods is one of their recommendations to reduce fatalities and injuries to pedestrians. Number 11, 1 out of every 5 children under the age of 15 who were killed in traffic crashes were pedestrians, not passengers. 1 out of every 15, 1 out of every 5 under 15. Number 12, I looked at every source I could, AAA, insurance data that was out there. But the most information I got was the National Safety Council, their injury facts for pedestrians, the National Highway Transportation, the countermeasures that work, and that's where I got the statement about slower speeds. Pedestrian traffic fatalities by state, that was primarily on state and federal highways. And Sergeant Brandon Frazier gave me some ideas of places to look, and he's going to continue to look on WebCars to see if he can find any more information that's specific to Ada County, or even better, to Boise, Meridian, and Nampa, to see if there are differences in 2 cities that have been 20 miles an hour for over 65 years, and our city that's still at 25. And next page. These were, one back. These were all of the issues I brought to you back on the last month. Reasons why I thought that 20 miles an hour would be beneficial to the citizens of Meridian. So I won't repeat all of those. We all looked at them last time. And the next page. I pulled the city the city codes for Boise, for Napa, and for Meridian. I took, and I've got Boise and Meridians, Boise and Napa's if you'd like to see it, so I could look for the language that talked about 20 miles an hour. And then I pulled ours. And what you see here in red is language that I'm just suggesting might be added to our city code. We don't even speak to, I couldn't find it anyway, we don't speak to school zones. Our other two neighbor cities do. So I even added language in here that follows what we currently are doing, 20 miles an hour in school zones, just so we would have it codified in our city code. So this is what could be presented to city council if the commission so recommends. And I think that's it. Questions?
Questions for Mr. Spiewak? Mr. McKinney?
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. Let me go back to something you said at the beginning. I didn't see it in the notes, and that's why I wanted to ask you about it. Did you say that Idaho has the second lowest rate of auto pedestrian accidents in the nation?
Yes.
Okay.
The seventh lowest in the nation in pure numbers, the second lowest per
Second lowest
thousand.
rate.
Per
Right.
thousand population, which is great.
Right, and of course, it would make sense that rates are the thing to look at, because of course, lower population, you have to compare apples to apples.
Right.
Do you have any information that shows a correlation between, for example, Portland enacted this 20 mile per hour thing some time ago. Do you have any information that's showing that after they did that, accident rates went down?
When I called and talked to them, they did not maintain that data. It was anecdotal data to them from their own accident records and that, but it doesn't split out residential from major intersections. And I could pursue that. It's what Sergeant Frazier was hoping he could get from web cars for Idaho, but the data doesn't exist. It doesn't break it down by, an address, a street address. It does it by the highways and intersections.
Right. Well, and because part of the reason I asked that is that sheet you gave on the Utah crash facts, second to last page of the slides here, at the very bottom left, it has a list of the leading contributing factors for pedestrian crashes, and speed too fast is number 5, and it appears only related to 4%, which makes me think that the biggest the posted speed limit or a default speed limit might not necessarily be of any significant
Then I
benefit.
should have brought you the one from 2004. That's when they implemented it, and that's when you saw the change take place. And that's where I got the statement that 1 out of every 5 children under the age of 15 was killed in a pedestrian accident. I tried to get the most current data. This was the one for 2016, but they publish this every year.
So you're saying that this data comes from Utah after Utah statewide passed a law lowering default speed limits to 20 miles per hour?
In the cities they did. They're like us. Not every city's 20, but this is state data. But the state data did drop the year that the majority of cities that made that change, Salt Lake City. That's their major population area. It was the reason why I made the assumption that we look in pretty good shape. Why? Because the majority of our population is already 20. You take the city of Boise and city of Napa, put those populations together, that makes up a big chunk of the population, residential population in the state of Idaho. You threw Meridian in, that's the vast majority of it.
Well, just one last question. Do you have any information that gives us any kind of a feel for the compliance rate? When a default speed limit is put in place, do people follow it, or do people still pretty much just do what they've always done before?
It was only anecdotal data, and that was primarily from Sergeant Frazier. People will drive what people want to drive, but by posting it and having it where it is visible and people seeing that the speed is 20 miles an hour, will that someone who does drive a little slower, maybe they drive at 30 instead of 35 or 25 instead of 30, are we saving the life of a child or an elderly person crossing the street? a person who sees a 20-mile-an-hour residential speed limit and continues to drive at the 30 or 35 they have, the only difference to them is that they get ticketed. The ticket goes from 90 to 155 bucks. So I don't know. I don't know that it will. I think it would only slow down people's actual driving when they are used to seeing that speed being somewhat slower. It's interesting, the city of Boise, that is 20, took the residential area that's on our side of Eagle Road, Bristol Heights, and bumped it up to 25 because of the complaints they got that people were used to driving faster in Meridian, who lived in Bristol Heights that's really stuck in the middle of Meridian. You know, I guess it's a thumb that sticks out on the other side of Eagle Road, right there at Chinden. So that's the only place in Boise where it's 25 miles an hour instead of 20, unless it's posted at a faster speed, a four-lane highway or something else that goes through a residential area, or a mixed commercial residential that might be at 30 or 35.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Hopkins.
I commend you for your information. Got a lot of data here. Something I am curious about, the one that shows the change, the drastic change between 20 and 25. Do you have a feel for how many cities in the country has a 20? I mean, this is kind of a tall order, but.
No place I could find that. But this is based not on cities, this is based upon accidents that were recorded where someone at 20 miles an hour hit a pedestrian. What was the chance of a fatality? That 5 mile an hour increase in speed, you can see the increase in fatalities. So these are fatalities that were listed where they either had an estimated speed, skid marks, or whatever they have to do to try to estimate it, but it was done across the nation when they filed that information. I went to the source to see if there was any other information they might have, and they directed me to this that was done in 2015, but they didn't have it broken down by state or area or anything, or residential versus urban. They just had state information, speed versus fatality.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I'm just wondering if there's not a correlation that there's not that many. I mean, there probably, if this is a number of fatalities at 25, if the nation is all going 25 miles an hour, obviously you're going to have more people killed at that than you would if the percentage of 20 mile an hour is drastically
I think this was a
less.
pure fact of a person being hit by a car at 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, and what happens. And that change took place between 20 and 25. Now, whether it was at 21, 22, 23, as John Wasson might have suggested when he was here last month, I don't know. But I do know that at 20, it's far less than at 25. I wasn't going to stand out there and try it, but it just made sense.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chair? I'll defer to the councilman.
No. I defer to the commission, please.
So, Mr. Spiewak, thanks for
It's Randy.
bringing all this together. You have a lot of really good data here. And I'm pretty familiar with quite a bit of it myself as well. So kind of in response to Commissioner McKinney's question about on the 2016 Utah data and this being too fast, we accounted for 4% of fatalities. So that is just the number of people who were exceeding the speed limit that caused a fatality. But if that speed limit is the improper speed limit and they were not speeding, so let's say they were going 25 and not speeding, you still have a significantly higher chance
Than lower,
of a
right.
fatality. So, and that would fall under most likely the failure to yield the right-of-way, which is the largest bucket. I wish Mr. Wasdahl was here, or not Mr. Wasdahl, I'm sorry, Mr. Wasson from ACHD. I would be curious to know how many residential speed limit signs of 25 miles per hour Meridian actually has.
I drove through the square mile that I live in. You could count them on your two hands.
Honestly, I don't think there's that many. It's the written but not posted law. If it's not posted, then it's 25 miles per hour. So I know we have them when you come into the city, but I don't think there's a whole lot out
Not a
there.
lot.
I would really like to know how many are out there, though, to know what the cost is gonna be.
ACHD is taking care of that, not us.
Right, right. So that would be my request for ACHD as a takeaway, to find out how many signs would have to be replaced and the cost and how.
I did contact a number of HOAs. I'm on an HOA board. And to see, because we offered to ACHD to put in stop signs and pay for the installation, the signs, everything. And John said, no, we'll do the study, and if they're warranted, we'll put them in. And they put in 5. We didn't go in talking about speed limits, but it was John's statement from ACHD that stop signs don't slow cars down. We were trying to get cars to slow down. So we took what we could, took the stop signs. But I will venture to guess that a number of homeowners associations would be willing to help ACHD out if their budget won't stand the change, and help pay for the cost of signage that says 20 miles an hour. Or even help with, like Portland did, the temporary signs while that's being done. I think John made the statement, it would take ACHD 6 to 7 months to convert the signs. There just aren't a lot. It'd be nice if we had more.
So I'm a big supporter of this. The data is clear. Slower speed limits saves lives. And
If they're followed.
right. You know, compliance and enforcement, it's a whole nother ball of wax. I think anecdotally, of course, just driving around this area, the Treasure Valley, people tend to drive a little slower than the posted limits. And so maybe that's why Idaho's second from the bottom, or second lowest in terms of per capita. But I 100% support this proposal. But I would really like to know what the cost is, you know, how the city and ACHD could maybe defray some of those costs. Thank you.
Questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes?
I have a couple thoughts that I'd like to share, as you might imagine. So first, Commissioner Leslie, I'd like to challenge you a little bit. I would suggest that the data is not clear that speed saves lives. In fact, I will suggest just the opposite. So in Idaho, the lowest crash rates on any roads are on the highest speed facilities. So interstate highways in Idaho have the lowest crash rates of all crashes and of fatal crashes. And the highest crash rates are on local roads. So both crash rates and fatal crash rates, the highest is on local roads. So I may suggest a future agenda topic when we get to that point. But so, you know, I think that's an overstatement to say that the data says that slower is safer. And Randy, if I may ask.
Before you leave that, if you go back to that and take a look, and also the chart in there, you're absolutely right. You get hit on the interstate, you're dead meat, but there just aren't a lot of people crossing the interstate on foot. What you're looking at is people who are crossing streets, and what streets do they cross? They are residential and commercial, not major streets. And they're ones that are hurt are ones that are crossing where there are not controlled crosswalks. So, yeah, 85 miles an hour, there just aren't very many accidents because nobody's crossing the street going 85, but they sure are on residential streets and city streets.
Mr. Chairman, if I can continue a little bit. So, Randy, I've got a couple questions for you.
Sure.
A few. So it sounds like all of this, you know, I'm trying to confirm or make sure I'm understanding here. So it sounds like everything, the reason for your wanting to do this is for pedestrian
Safety,
reasons, right? Everything's pedestrian related. Okay.
bicycle or walking. But the predominant, because they didn't break out a bicycle from a walking pedestrian. They just were not in a motorized vehicle.
Okay, so bicycle or pedestrian.
That's what you saw on Portland.
All right. So you presented us with some data, and I'm trying to understand. I promise I'm not trying to beat you up here.
It's okay.
We appreciate you being here. So you presented some information to us, and I think you mentioned this, but again, just to confirm, so you weren't able to obtain pedestrian crash data for Meridian or even for Ada County or whatever, because you weren't able to either
Database
see the
doesn't contain
data
it.
or whatnot. Okay, so we don't necessarily know if there's any pedestrian crashes in Meridian. You know, I don't know offhand.
4
Last
last year. 4 fatalities.
There were 4 pedestrian fatalities in Meridian. Okay, so I'd like to see, you know, that data.
That's what I got from Sergeant Frazier, and he had it was a myriad of other injuries. Many of them, he assumed wouldn't be reported. Child gets hit crossing the street, is just bruised up and goes home. They don't call the police.
Right.
So it's hard to get all the data. The fatality is pretty straightforward. Ambulance picked them up.
Okay, well, I think that would be helpful to see, you know, rather than just verbally here. I have to ask also, so I'm looking at, okay, the page titled 20 mile per hour issues. And several of these say, you know, like number 1, safer for kids crossing street. You know, several of these have the word, or 7, safer for City of Meridian. Number 8, safer for. Number 9, safer for. I guess, how do you define safety? I know that seems like a dumb question, but the longer I do this, the less I think I know what that word means, believe it or not. So what do you mean when you say safer for? You know,
The way I was approaching it is reducing residential street limit speeds from 25 to 20. Would that save the life of one child, 2, 3, or all 4 of those? And the 4, I don't know whether they were young or older or some of both, because I have to scurry across the street at my age. But if one life is saved and it doesn't have any direct effect on the city's pocketbook, is it worth it? Sure as hell is. And why are we so different from Boise and Nampa for 70 years? Why are we still at 25? When I ask that question, is it, well, they took whatever was on this Ada County code, and that was adopted X number of years ago into the City of Meridian code, and it's been that way ever since, because no one brought it forward. But our 2 largest neighbors did.
so then my definition of safe or safety when it comes to roads and transportation is reduce fatalities, injuries, or crashes. So reduction of reduction of severity or frequency of crashes. And it kind of sounds like that's what you're talking about too.
I think you're right.
Okay. And that kind of comes back to the number, we'll call them 4 fatalities. You know, I hope that number is not right, to be honest, right? So I'd be interested, if that number's 4, where those 4 occurred. Did they occur on roads that were 25 miles per hour, or did they occur somewhere else?
They
right?
did not occur in an intersection. Those were the ones that I looked for that weren't in intersections. And you can see across the nation, the vast majority of pedestrian fatalities, 82% are not at intersections. 18% are. 82% take place on non-controlled crosswalks. And none of them were in school districts. They are around schools where they are, you know, the police are there. It is posted at 20. There's flashing lights. The folks see that it's 20 and they crawl through there. But so they took place on areas where I think there is a lack of speed limit signage. Just in my own neighborhood, I asked people who lived along our streets just to eyeball cars that were just driving down the street, whether they're neighbors or whether they're from one of our adjoining subdivisions. And they can't estimate speeds. They don't have radar guns. But they were going fast enough to where if you rolled a beach ball out in front of them, 15, 20 feet ahead of them, that ball was crushed. There's no way to stop that quick. But if they were doing 20, would they have been able to stop? And I think that's the reason why there's so few fatalities at 20 miles an hour, and that as the speed goes up, it's harder to brake and keep from or prevent from injuring or a fatality with someone crossing the street. It's worse, I think, in our own neighborhood, kids that going back and forth between parked cars out into the street. They'll go across the street to get a baseball or whatever it may be, because the car going down the road, no matter what speed, doesn't see them till the last second when they come out between cars. If you are curious, take your own car, drive through your own neighborhood, drive at 20. Even 20 is fast, and then look at the difference at 25 or 30. But just between 25 and 20, you'll notice the difference of how quickly you can respond and stop. And if it saves the life of any child, if we had 0, I'd be really happy.
Which is why we need to see that number, right? What is that number specifically on 25 mile per hour streets? Because that's what we're talking about. If that number's 0, you know, I'm.
You won't find it 0, not in this state, but we don't have state data. It's not 0 across the nation. Why would Idaho be so different than every other state, larger or smaller?
Well, and we can't influence the state or the nation. We can't influence the city, right? So
We can influence drivers. That's all I care about.
Okay.
Just
So,
had 2 questions.
yeah. I use a couple liberally, Mr. Chairman. So, I guess another observation, Mr. Chairman. So we talked about this figure, it's the yellow figure, it says 7 at the bottom. I appreciate your gathering up the data. I'm not sure that it paints quite the same picture for me that it does for you, Randy. You know, I look at this yellow figure, the one titled Pedestrian Fatalities by Posted Speed Limit. So these seem to be so all fatalities for roads that have that speed limit.
Yes.
You know, it's not a rate, it's not, yeah, so this is what Commissioner McKinney was talking about, rates, so we can talk apples and apples. You know, there may be very few roads that have posted speed limits of 5 to 20 miles per hour, whereas there may be lots and lots and lots posted 25 to 50, right? So just accumulation of, you know, a tick mark for every one, I'm not sure that helps us a whole lot, right?
Yeah, there was nothing I could do that was proportional.
Sure.
I understand, but I
yeah.
just looked at just what happens when a pedestrian is hit by a vehicle going a certain speed.
It could be in part, you know, a reflection of how many streets have those speed limits versus how many crashes actually occur. So
Yeah. I can
guess
tell
I'll
you
stop
this,
there.
in looking through the data, because I wanted to be fair, I just didn't want to hunt for that data that supported what my premise was. You're not going to find a whole lot of data that encourage you to drive faster. You just aren't going to find it. I looked everywhere, and there's not, I was trying to find very specific, between 20 and 25, what happens. And I've given you everything I could find. But there's nobody out there recommending driving faster. And I think when you look at the increase in pedestrian fatalities across the nation, 35%, versus the decrease in vehicular fatalities, down 6, with the same cars driving, or proportionally the same, why is that? People were just going too fast, and when people were crossing streets, and people got hit. So 20 miles an hour seemed to be safer than 25 if people will follow it. So anyway,
Mr. Spivak, did you have an opportunity to speak with Mr. Wazen on his comment last session that there's a little difference between posting at 20 and 25 as to what people actually drive? And, you know, I get it, 1 is too many, but let's save that argument for a different topic. But be that as it may, seems to be a little difference, and particularly, he has information for Ada County. Particularly, Mr. Lancaster's asking for City of Meridian.
Yeah, there is no data available on our statewide, on CARS web that says pedestrian accidents by a specific location. The ones that are entered into the system are predominantly state, county, and federal highways. They just don't track what happens in your neighborhood. And that is reported, Sergeant Frazier said, he's real skeptical of it anyway because they don't report it. Meridian doesn't report it.
And cost, I get it. It's always a question, an unfounded mandate. But say that it's ACHG's problem when it comes out of every taxpayer's pocket. So conversation would be, are taxpayers willing to fund these signs?
Well, I'm not sure how many square miles of residential area we have in Meridian. And I found, a half a dozen, less than 6 signs in our square mile that is almost exclusively residential. Meridian, Locust Grove, Eustic, and McMillan, 6 signs. So if you try to extrapolate that across our residential areas in Meridian, I think there's probably less than 150 signs that have to be repainted. That's why John said 6 to 7 months they could do it.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes. Way beyond our 15 minutes allocated.
Yeah,
We
sorry.
got 45 minutes into it, so.
This will be my last one, thank you. So the slide before the total number of pedestrian fatalities, where it's the percentage. So that one really clearly shows 5% fatality rate, 20 miles per hour, 45% at 30 miles per hour. And, 2025 is going to be somewhere in the middle of that. But ACHD probably has, they've done a bunch of speed studies for us over the years. And they have that unholy number of the 85th percentile that they love to use. They probably have those numbers for residential speed studies that they've done for us. Be interesting to see what the residential 85th percentile speeds are over the last couple of years. It's probably over 25 in 25 zones. So
Oh, the
I would-
actual speeds, you're right.
So I'd like to ask if ACHD can provide that for us, and then and I know he's not here, but is that possible, Caleb? And also a cost estimate on replacing, I guess they don't have to replace the signs, they just
Repaint 'em.
They just do the sticker.
No, the signs are replaced.
Mr. Chairman,
So just a cost estimate. Thank you.
one more comment to kind of hit what
A conclusionary comment?
Yes, Commissioner Lancaster was getting at. I was thinking of one of those fatalities that happened on a push scooter. I'm going to guess it's probably one of those 4.
Could have been.
Not too long ago. That happened on Eagle Road. And I think that was is that 40 or 45 where that's at? 40 mile an hour. So I think Mr. Lancaster wants to see the where were those streets? Are those streets that are residential streets that the kids are coming out between cars, or is it kids trying to cross Eagle
Yeah,
Road?
where the 4 took place, I didn't have the date, I just knew
fine.
4.
Commissioners, we have a question to decide. Is it gather more information, vote for a resolution, or table the resolution?
Mr. Chairman,
Lancaster?
if I may,
Yes, you may.
I think we need more data, as you might expect from me. Specifically, I'm wanting to see crash rates, pedestrian crash rates, pedestrian crash severity on 25 mile per hour roads. I'm looking for, is there a difference between crash rates in Meridian, where it's posted 25 miles per hour, and Boise or Nampa, where it's posted 20? Right, so is there a difference? Does the posted speed limit make a difference? You alluded to Mr. Wasson's comment last month that there's really not a difference between observed speeds in Meridian and Boise, meaning the sign doesn't do anything. So I think we need all of those pieces of information to make a decision that's not based on emotion, right? A decision based on anything less than data would be an emotional decision. So I think we need more data. I think we can continue this discussion. I don't think we need to table it indefinitely, but I think that some more data is necessary to make a not emotional decision, if you will.
Okay. Is there a motion before the commission?
I don't know if we need a motion. I can make this a motion if you want, Mr. Chairman, but I would just say that we continue this, for another, another meeting, so we keep it on our agenda, if you will.
And who would bring that information? Who would be tasked with developing that?
I don't know, Mr. Chairman. I think our job here is to receive and evaluate the information, not necessarily to produce it.
Agreed, but I was just saying, who's going to bring us that information if I can use it? Mr. Leslie, you had a comment?
I can provide some data that I have available, but I'd still want to have the ACHD speed study data and the cost data.
Okay. So it is I'll just jump ahead. So the commission is asking to continue this to another conversation. Mr. Leslie brings some information. We're asking Mr. Hood if he would touch bases with Mr. Wasson or ACHD and see if they can provide any of that information, and then continue this conversation to another session of Transportation Commission. Unless otherwise agreed by executive fiat, I'll move on then.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Spior. Mr. Hood? Item 5C, shared vehicles update.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So beginning on page 23 of your packet, there's a cover memo, and then the next several pages are a draft request for proposals, and the second half of that roughly is a draft sample contract that could be entered into between the city and a shared vehicle provider. Again, this is e-scooters. Did discuss this with the city council on November 6th, and then again last Tuesday. They continued it to tomorrow for some more discussion points. In that memo, it kind of lays out a couple as we prepare to go out for RFP in 2020. I guess that's kind of the first decision point for council. Do we want to go out for RFP again? Is this a program we want to entertain after the first of the year in Meridian? I think the answer's yes to that, but there were at least a couple at the dais last week that questioned that anyways. Maybe before I jump into some of the other discussion points, I did discuss with our current franchisee, Bird, what's going on. I shared last month with you some of their data on ridership. I contacted them subsequent to that and said, hey, what are you doing to increase ridership? What maybe is a hindrance to ridership? Is there anything we can do as a city to get numbers up higher anyways? And they're really kind of, one thing in particular, he says, without the village, your market basically doesn't work. That's the destination in Meridian is to go to the village, and they've got, they exit out so the scooters don't work in the village. So he said without that, it's not a real viable program in Meridian. And he said, I don't know if we would even apply to continue on unless the village allows scooters on their campus. And he said, or you reduce the fee. So right now, the city charges $25,000 a year. We weren't sure how much time and effort we anticipated the sky falling with just scooters everywhere and people complaining 3 times a day, 24 hours a day, whatever, I don't know. So we established a fee to basically offset the costs of staff dealing with that. we have spent quite a bit of staff time dealing with this topic, but the complaints haven't been that much, a dozen or so, roughly 2.5 to 3 hours. So the complaints have been on the lower side, so that's a good thing. But again, we continue to monitor and track the data and discuss and different things. So there's staff time being invested, if you will, but in the complaint side, not that much. So some of the discussion points we talked about last week were that fee methodology that I just mentioned, so $25,000. And part of that has to do with multiple vendors. So right now, we just have one. The new RFP that you see in the packet here has up to 2 vendors is what we would propose. So you could have up to 2. And part of the discussion last week was, again, that $25,000. Maybe how would that work? As $50,000, you're not going to get 2 vendors that are each going to pay $25,000 when the program right now isn't successful. So we talked about that actually just earlier today. What we're going to propose to council tomorrow will be $12,000 per vendor. So if we only get one, it's still only $12,000. But if we get 2, it'd be 24. So roughly the same. And then that's easier to prorate too. Like this next year, we won't have the contract ready till probably later in February. So they'll deploy in March. So we just charge them for 9 months of service, basically, or $9,000. So it makes the math easier. It seems to make some sense, and it seems to be in a line. It's still early, but it seems to be in a line with roughly the staff time it takes to oversee the project. So that's kind of fee methodology. There are other ways that other communities do it. Some other communities do charge per ride. Just there's different ways to do it, right? To skin the cat, if you will. I didn't really get a sense, and I'm glad Councilman Kavanaugh's here. So if he has some other points, or maybe I'm not summarizing the discussion well. I didn't hear from a vast majority of council, though, that we were going to, aside from the overall cost maybe being higher than what we're spending, if you will, working with Bird currently, a reduction in that overall fee. I didn't hear anybody saying, yeah, let's go to a per ride or change the way we charge fees. Just that it should be commensurate with the amount of investment made by staff, so it offsets the cost. The length of the contract, we're also proposing a 3-year term up to, so it could be terminated by either party after year 1. But rather than having to go through this RFP, it's a lot of work on the city staff. It's a lot of work for your private industry to put together a proposal. It's a lot of time on their end too. So if they know they get the contract, they maybe put a little more effort in the initial one, knowing that it's up to 3 years and they have that contract. So we did talk about that. Again, some pros and cons to that, but we think that's probably the best way to go. Age restriction, this is a toughie. Everyone seems to, at least in the city, seems to like the idea of having either licensed riders or adults or some age restriction. The reality is, though, there isn't anybody in the industry that actually verifies the age of a rider. So they don't scan your retina or thumbprints to make sure you're adult, or check your driver's license to make sure it's you. I mean, I could go and sign it out and then hand it over to somebody else in their writing, right? So that technology just isn't there. But we like the idea of educating the public. These should be ridden by either, again, licensed drivers, adults, something to that effect, 16 and over, 14 and over, even with a permit, something to that effect. But again, no one in the industry is actually verifying that the rider is of age, so to speak. So how do we word that? So that was something we bantered about quite a bit last week with council, is how do we actually put that into a contract, knowing nobody can actually deliver that in our community? Is it more on the education side? Is it in your proposal? Tell us how you will curtail the best you can riding of these e-scooters by children. And then we didn't get too much into minimum and maximum number of vehicles to be deployed. We did talk the first time about that, though, with council, and a seasonal adjustment. So like this time of year, having it go down to a minimal amount, but still making sure that they're deployed. You could get people in the community that tend to rely on these. So just because it snows they still need to get to work, if they're counting on this form of transportation. So that's something that, again, we haven't fully come up with all the details, but something seasonally to have them deploy at least 50 within the community. And then if you look, it's kind of a sliding scale, no less than 100 and up to 250 per, or 500 in total in the city. But again, at no point in time drop that below 50 in the community. So Anyways, those are some of the discussion points over the last couple of times that we've talked about it with council. I know there's quite a few pages there. There are some notes and some call-outs and some things to address. That's kind of the update. Let me just check my notes from when we talked about it the first time. Wanted some more information again on the fee, and again, we just aren't tracking it that way. Every minute that we spent on, again, I had 6 staff members, and we spent 30 minutes on it today, but I didn't add to the spreadsheet of how much time we're actually spending on this. So I'm sorry I can't give you any more information on that. Council would like it too. How much time are we actually spending on this? But that was one of the things from last time that was brought up, that data. I think it was Commissioner Leclerc that brought that up, but anyways, I think I'll stop there, and any feedback you have, again, I'll be speaking about this more with the council tomorrow night, so any feedback you have or questions you have, I would stand for them now.
Commissioners?
Mr. Chairman, I got one question. It just caught my eye because I've read so many indemnifications and signed so many of these that it doesn't mention fatalities in that list of things that you're protecting the city from, and I don't think I've signed a contract to enter the road ever in my life that's not listed. So anyway, you guys
Bring that up.
got lawyers, and so I'm sure they've read through it, but just something I noticed.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes. Mr. Lancaster?
I know last month I advocated that the Transportation Commission needs to take a larger role, and I admittedly took kind of a hands-off role when we've talked about shared vehicles and scooters before. So I don't know if there's an action that's, requested or desired from our group. I guess I will offer a statement of support and even a motion if desired to be supportive of continuing the shared vehicle, program. I don't know what the right word is. Be supportive of that, this is for city staff most, to decide, so I won't nitpick too much, but this is a rather involved proposal, I think. But in general, I offer general support for continuing the shared vehicle program.
Very good. Anything else?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Lewis?
just a couple of comments and then a question. I like the idea of the length of contract being increased to 3 years with the 1-year renewable. And I also like the reduction in the flat fee. I was always uncomfortable with that $25,000 flat fee, given what they charge in the city of Boise, which I believe is more in the $5,000 to $10,000 range, if I remember that correctly. So that reduction to 12, I like a lot. And then a question: the no ride zone around the village, was that a request of the village owners, or how did that come to be?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, yes, the roads through the village, except for the ones that surround the village, are private property. So they've chosen to not allow them on their private property. So those are all lanes, Long Wing Lane. So Records is a public street, so you technically should ride that. The park is also what they call geo-fenced. So you can ride them in city parks. There's a section on how fast they go in city parks. But yes, that was a choice by that property owner not to allow them.
So
They have other restrictions too,
Yeah.
Mr. Lewis.
well, yes.
Not take a 53-foot trailer into the village either.
But then also I would support the comments of Commissioner Lancaster also, that the commission would recommend that this program continue.
I was thinking of one, and Mr. Lancaster, I thought was going to get there. On page 26, and I know we're not council members, nor do we have that accountability, but I was thinking under the presentations, I'm thinking back to the past year, 2 years, the bird people and green? Lime, okay, I was in that hue. They were able to come and make their presentation to us. I'm not asking to insert ourselves into that questions or presentation before the city, but my question is there interest of asking that we be part of the presentation in a different, just like they have in the past, they've come before us and made the pitch, and I say that complimentary. So I was thinking, that is what we had asked last week, and so, can we invite ourselves to be part of this process at some level?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Lancaster,
I'm sorry I didn't, we weren't thinking the same thing there, and I didn't pick up on that, but my thoughts on this is, I think we know what the scooters are. We've heard the presentations before. I don't necessarily need or want to see, if we have a presentation, fine. I don't necessarily need to see a presentation because we kind of get it now. I think, for me at least, the involvement I want to have is recommendation as far as continue or not continue. And then, I don't need or particularly want to get too far in the weeds of selecting who is the vendor, right? But more programmatic support rather than vendor selection, if that makes sense.
understood, just an idea.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other comments? If not, I'll ask.
Mr. Chairman?
Excuse me.
Mr. Chairman?
I see you waving your hand. I guess I better get my better glasses.
No worries. So I would agree with Commissioner Lewis that I'd like to still support this program. I'd hate to see it go away because it's really not because it is cost prohibitive for the vendor to do business here when they're losing money. And I'd really like to ask, maybe council if we could explore some other idea of like per ride charges instead of a flat fee. In a market that's small like ours, it's probably very difficult for them to predict the ridership. So, I'd like to see them explore all avenues for the franchise fee, as it were.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Kavanagh.
I know that time is running out, but I figured I try not to chime in, but at least with that particular question, to give the commission some background. That was something that the council initially discussed, was maybe a very small administrative fee and then a charge per ride. The response I think that we got back from staff was there was concern about how do we track that and invoice on that. So now we're invoicing these two companies on a monthly basis. Who are we using to validate if that number was correct? And the response from staff was, let's make this as clean and easy at least at the beginning before we go down that route. I know the city of Boise does that, as does many other jurisdictions. I don't think the council is immediately opposed to that. It's just a case of we're also not, the goal of this program was to not have it be overburdensome upon staff. And honestly, the number we came up with was what we felt, because we were concerned about the amount of administrative legwork in managing this program. We wanted to make sure that taxpayers weren't having to subsidize a new program coming in. We really wanted the program to pay for itself.
Okay. So does the commission a recommendation or comment to make to city council from this conversation?
Mr. Chairman, are you looking for a motion for a formal recommendation here? Is that what
Or
we're doing?
just that a boy go forward, or that a guy, or that a gal go forward, whatever
Yeah.
the correct pronoun is?
Well, okay, Mr. Chairman, I move that we as a Transportation Commission recommend to the City Council to Recommend continuation of this shared vehicle program, letting city staff and city council work out the details as far as fee and whatnot, but to offer general support for continuation.
Your second?
Mr.
Second.
Chairman, before we do that, can we add that 3-year? I think it's a good idea, as it was said on this commission, that the 3-year,
In favor of that?
yeah.
Fine.
So, Mr. Chairman, so I'll accept the suggestion that we add support for the what is it, the 3-year contract term, yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Second that.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Okay. 5C, new business, Meridian Police Department update. Seeing no officer here except Mr. Hood. Do you have a proxy?
Yes, I received, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I received an email over the weekend from Sergeant Frazier. He said he's unable to attend, but if I'm able to share on his behalf regarding the hands-free sign placement discussion, we have already put in a request to ACHD and ITD for signage at specific locations. After we did that, Ada County Commissioner Rick Visser indicated the commissioners are working with the cities of Cuna, Star, Eagle, and Garden City to adopt a hands-free ordinance in line with Meridian's, and he hopes to accomplish this very, very early in 2020. Therefore, placement of signs specific to Meridian may not be warranted because if his plan comes to fruition everywhere, but what we see in Ada County would have the same law. So it sounds like it's on hold to see if other cities adopt similar ordinances, and then we wouldn't have to put them up at all of our boundaries. So it still doesn't answer the question or the about where they should be placed. This one for hands-free ordinance, it sort of addresses it, but in general, the sign placement discussion isn't answered. But that was the update he asked me to share with you all on that one.
Okay. So, well, that's in the category of, let's see what happens in January then, or February, or March. Okay. Good idea. Okay. Item, thank you for the update, Mr. Hood. 6B, fixed route transit, Stephen Hudd and Alyssa Tayson. Okay.
So, Mr. Chair, just as Stephen's coming forward, just to orient you a little bit there, page 47 is some of the information that I believe they're going to be speaking about this afternoon.
Hello, Commission. Thank you for giving us the time. So we, as discussed previously, wanted to keep you guys informed with how things are going with the fixed route service project in Meridian. And one of the first tasks that we had on there was sharing with you some of the messaging that we would like to be using as we talk to the community in Meridian about that service. So what is in front of you is some draft language about the types of messaging that we wanted to share with the community about why this project we feel is important, and wanted your feedback on that. There were 3 kind of broader themes that we organized. So I don't anticipate like a flashy handout with exactly these words on it. We were just trying to give ourselves some structures to the types of messages that we felt would be most resonant with the community about why fixed route transit is going to work here, and wanted to get the Transportation Commission's input if we're missing something in any of these talking points. But the 3 themes generally are that the service is helpful to respond to the pressures of growth, generically. It is helpful to respond to the specific actions that the Meridian Council has done over the years in permitting and encouraging higher density development along certain corridors. It also is supportive of the agricultural heritage of Meridian in terms of our ability to minimize the impacts of development on the amount of land that's taken for development. And I think that is kind of hearkening back to some of the reasons why I think the Meridian Council has been approving larger or higher density use developments. So trying to tie those things together. And then lastly, that it's specifically in support of some of the larger developments that are kind of in front of the city in the moment, namely the developments occurring at 10 Mile Crossing in downtown Meridian and out near Kleiner Park. So together they're all different elements of growth, but we were trying to figure out how can we make the strongest messages about why fixed route transit generally and specifically on this corridor are things that we're pursuing. So I didn't read all these for you, but I trust that you took the time to do that, if not before, while I was talking, and would stand for any questions.
Commissioners? Mr. Lewis?
No,
Oh,
sorry.
you were reaching for your,
No, I was just stretching.
okay. Other comments? Mr. Hunt, I've read through these, and I get it when we talk about preserving agricultural lands and heritage. And I'm concerned about that, but what does that do to the land that, do you compensate the family that says, no, you can't sell that to the developers? Is that what, behind that message? Or am I reading that wrong?
What I was trying to get at there is the idea, so we're faced in the valley generally with this kind of struggle between how do you accommodate growth without paving over everything that maybe that you love about your city. And I say pave generically to be talking about if you're consuming more land in lower density developments, then there's less space available for agriculture or other activities. And I think the city of Meridian has taken some actions to try and encourage higher density developments or apartments in the city that do help with accommodating growth at a smaller geographic footprint. And so what we're trying to talk about here is the idea that transit can support the community growing in a way that still reflects or honors the heritage of where we came from, as not as an agricultural place where lands can still be used for other purposes besides just housing. It's trying to find a way that all of our actions that we're taking as a community are trying to support one another, right? We get sometimes higher density developments are objected to because of the traffic concerns that they might generate, and so this is an effort to help mitigate some of those. But the reason the higher density development is in part of interest is because it uses less land resource for the development.
Not to be facetious or argumentative, are there any working farms inside the city of Meridian?
Not, I don't know of any, but I haven't done I don't know of any.
And I get it, because I do favor a development of a transit system.
Yeah.
Okay. Ms. Tayson, do you have anything to add?
No, I'm pretty much just here to help support Stephen, take any notes, that sort of thing.
Okay. Any follow-up, commissioners? Mr. Hunt, I was going to say you tend to be a regular at our meetings, and appreciate that and your information.
Sure.
And I encourage VRT in your efforts to put together a public transportation system. Mr. Lewis, I think, would join me. We sat on a committee several years ago. So it's all good stuff, and appreciate hearing more from you.
Thank you. And just as a way of reminder, so the reason that we wanted to share this with you all is to make sure that the first time you didn't see some of this messaging is when we were trying to talk to the City of Meridian residents about these things. So we will continue to work with Meridian staff on kind of that outreach and work kind of within these talking point frameworks to share that with the community. So thank you.
Very good. Thank you. 6C, Transportation Commission Year-End Report. There is a draft of a proposed report, which Mr. Hood as prepared on page 49. I have reviewed that. From my perspective, it presents a fair report. It's at a 30,000-foot view and some major topics. Times past, I've made a couple of additions, but on this one, I think he did a very good job of putting it. He did mention that there were a couple of changes that reflects the
So, Mr. Chair, I can run through those just real quickly if you'd like.
Go ahead.
So what you have in the packet and what is just now being handed out are 99% the same. What I did on the first page, well, first of all, I made it 2 pages instead of 2 pages and then part of a paragraph. So I changed the margins a little bit, but I added Commissioner Leckie to the commission there, and left Michael Vennard there still, but included his name. And then on the second to last paragraph, this meeting, I updated that because we actually didn't hear about the South Meridian stuff that wasn't on our agenda. So I took that out and instead mentioned your next thing, a review of the role and bylaws of the commission. So hopefully there's time to do that. And then again, I added that Commissioner Leckie joined us on this meeting and that last month was Commissioner Vennard's last meeting. So I would also just call to your attention, it's in both drafts, but that last commission, I did what you asked for last time and kind of give the council a heads up, and Commissioner Lancaster alluded to it in the previous topic, but wanting it to play a greater role in transportation things. So this is kind of a heads up for them, and I don't know at what point, Mr. Chair, you're going to draw straws to who actually goes before the council and presents our annual report, but that would probably be something for whoever that is this next February. That gives us a couple of months to figure out what that ask is, or if we're going to ask them to change our bylaws or the ordinance or whatever that looks like, or business as usual, I don't know. But just, again, that there's kind of a heads up there that the commission would like to play more of an active role. So hopefully that language is okay with everyone.
Mr. Lancaster.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, first off, I thank all that were involved in putting this together. It looks very good. If I may, I'd like to offer 2 small revisions. So in the first paragraph, kind of right in the middle of the paragraph, it says Planning Division Manager Caleb Hood provides staff support, comma, Sergeant Brandon Frazier provides regular updates from police perspective. I guess I want to give credit where credit's due, and I think it would be, I would like to add Sergeant Stacy Arnold in there as well, because he's been, working with us until just a couple months ago. So again, to give credit where credit's due, so I would just add Sergeants Stacy Arnold and Brandon Frazier provide regular updates. My second edit, or revision, I guess, is on the second page. Let's see, so this is the October meeting, 4th from the bottom. Let's see, second to last sentence, Sergeant Brandon Frazier was welcomed. I would like to reword the second to last line just a little bit. From Sergeant Frazier, discussed a hands-free driving ordinance with the commission, perhaps to Sergeant Frazier introduced a proposed hands-free driving ordinance to the commission. Yeah, I guess I'd propose that revision. I can repeat it if you need me to. Other than that, again, I think it looks very good. Caleb, thank you for the language, or Mr. Chairman, for the last paragraph. I think it's spot on. So again, thank you for the efforts to put this together. It's hard to believe that our year has gone this fast. When I look back at the topics we talked about this summer, I think that was 6 months ago. So.
Okay, I think those changes are amenable. I would offer in a preview, and I'm not, I guess my sense of humor is, generally it is the newly elected chairman that does the staff report in February. Now, in times past, I both pinch hit for a chairman who couldn't make it in my role as chairman, and I took the opportunity to do a little color commentary, if you will, because the report is read. But I've added my own personal. I'm not suggesting that that be continued by any means, but in thinking about the upcoming election, the new chairman will have that opportunity to make that pitch. So, with that, going to call for a motion to approve the report as drafted with the changes suggested by Mr. Lancaster.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Good work, Mr. Hood, thank you. Okay. D, discussion, role, bylaws, Transportation Commission. Going there, I think we've got to turn over to page 57, which particularly addresses the Transportation Commission. I think those are very broad assignments, if you will, requests or directions. Again, we'll go back to Mr. Lancaster's comments, which I wholeheartedly supported. I think we asked to take a bigger bite of the apple.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I think the area where we ought to perhaps discuss a wider role for the Transportation Commission is under section 2-7-2, duties and powers. Number one is sort of a catch-all, receive, review, and make recommendations to the City Council on traffic safety and transportation matters. And that, of course, is, it's very bland, it's not very specific. But it kind of encapsulates really all that we do, because that's all we do is make recommendations. There are some areas where I think it would make sense for this commission to have additional authority, and that would be in actually, well, if we look at, for example, number 3, it says, receive, review, and act on motorist, pedestrian, and bicyclist concerns or issues brought forth by citizens of Meridian that relate to safety of the traveling public. When it says act on these concerns, if our only job is as an advisory body, there really aren't any actions we can take other than recommending that the City Council do something. It seems to me that issues of speeds on local streets, pedestrian crossings, and so on, it would make sense that many of those issues could be opened up for actual decision on the part of this commission and subject to potential appeal to the City Council. But it would be something that's within the expertise of this commission, and it would be the sort of thing that we could, actually make decisions about. Should there be a crosswalk in this location? Or should there be a change to a posted speed in this particular area? Or, an adjustment to a school zone, the size of a school zone, et cetera. Those sorts of decisions could be reasonably delegated to this commission by the City Council, and it would make sense for us to consider those and be able to act on those.
I understand. I see it a little bit differently, but within that context, so if we have requested a speed study and get the results by way of example, then an action upon that would be to say, okay, where do we implement that speed study? And then let's take the speed limit from 25 to 20. You agree overall that that is a recommendation? Do we act upon that by further conversation saying, okay, we've counted the number of signs, we would estimate that the cost is X, Y, Z. And so we've done a little bit further research. I think within the realms of being an advisory group and still acting upon, we take one step further and, as you say, provide a little more information, or maybe a poor term, guidance, if you will, or just overall, a better recommendation. So I see it going a couple of ways. The other one is, and I'll jump ahead, would someone from this commission volunteer to go to certain city council meetings to verbalize or put a face to those recommendations? I'm just thinking steps that makes us more active.
Well, and I think under the current bylaws, there's nothing that restricts us from sending a representative to the city council to specifically present our findings and recommendations in a given case. We haven't been doing that normally, but I don't believe that we're restricted from doing that. So that wouldn't involve any kind of a change in our authority. I'm thinking that of something more along the lines of actually directing that changes be made in a specific location. Changes that are citywide in nature, for example, like the 20-mile-an-hour speed limit issue. That's clearly a matter ultimately for the city council to approve. But specific decisions on, a location for a crosswalk, or a location for a speed zone, or those sorts of specific issues, even decisions, a lot of other decisions, they go to the county, for example, traffic calming measures and so on. That's typically an ACHD issue. But other issues, we could handle those if we had the actual authority. We could actually make decisions that if no one opposes them and the city council doesn't want to take them up, they don't have to be bothered with them.
Chairman, can I pipe in there real quick?
By the way,
I think we've been doing that already. I mean, it's on this commission all 3 or 4 years now. And when a crosswalk or a speed limit is being recommended by a police officer or somebody in the neighborhood, we do take that upon ourselves to recommend that, and we work with Ada County to request that they do that, because in essence, we don't have any authority to do this. I mean, it's Ada County's roads, so we have to ask them to do that, and I think we've done that in the past. Just based on my history that I sat on this commission, so I just want to put 2 cents in.
I took a cue from Mr. Lancaster on his pre-election conversations with candidates, just to get their feel. And I'm not speaking for the newly elected mayor or his administration, but I did take the opportunity to ask him if there would be an opportunity to sit down with him, and I'm speaking globally, not me personally, but the chairman or members of the commission, and discuss our request, to be a little more active. This is how I heard it. That comment was received favorably, and so we might anticipate we might anticipate an invitation, or if we don't get it, we'll make the invitation to sit down with him and have that conversation. So there is that opportunity to have those conversations, I believe. And I have described this commission so that you know it, that present company excluded. There's some pretty bright people up here with a good deal of experience. And there's some good comments that come out of here. So I think we can be heard, gentlemen. And, gentlemen today. All right.
Mr. Chairman,
All right.
I just wonder how, refer to council on how much, putting crosswalks in places and changing speed limits, and how much does that leave the city open for, can we do that? Can we get more authority to do that kind of stuff?
Well, my quick answer is we're not elected officials, so we're not held accountable. And I made a sharp comment last time that I just don't see that it's an administrative body's function to dictate law, particularly when you do not stand for election. But, I get it, and I think there is that expertise that you can bring in and say, okay, Make a case.
Yeah,
I was referring.
sure. Mr. Chair and members of the commission, I think that needs to be analyzed as you have that conversation about what your role is. You know, we've got this list that you've talked a little bit about, but number 7 talks about review and make recommendations to city council on rules and regulations related to speed limits. So, you know, that would have to be changed as well. Are you going to parse that out and define what a spot speed limit is? I mean, ACHD does this without any input from us at times. They just come and tell you that it's been changed. So I think it's all on the table. It's all good information, and in the context of a new administration, it's worthy of that discussion. But don't, and you haven't lost track of the fact that the city council likes to be the one who, since they have that responsibility to take those final actions. And historically, this has been a recommending commission. But I do like what I'm hearing about being more involved with those recommendations, put a face to it, put a voice to it, put some force to it. Anyway, that goes beyond the question that you asked me, but those are my 2 cents.
Thank you.
We got more change than 2 cents there, so appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Lancaster.
if I may, I appreciate this discussion. I appreciate this item on the agenda. I made a couple notes here. I'd like to endorse what Commissioner McKinney said about this commission, and what Mr. Baird said about this commission being more proactive about making presentations and our recommendations to council. I think it would be appropriate, and I will volunteer to do, some of the legwork on this, that when our commission makes a recommendation, that we go and that we assign in this meeting as part of, making that recommendation, we assign one of us to go to the council and to present our recommendation to council. I can do that sometimes. I'm not going to be able to do it all times, but I think that would be wise. I think Caleb's done a great job, communicating that for us. I think it's a little bit unfair to Caleb that we put that on him and expect him to do that, right? So I think we can be more proactive there. So I'd like to endorse that suggestion. Councilman Cavanagh, I'm going to put you on the spot for just a second. I appreciate you being here. I always enjoy it when, I find it very helpful when you chime in. I know you try not to very much. I think you need to do it more. And, I know you're very careful not to squash what we're discussing or whatever, but your input is helpful, and I would like to see you more. And if there's months that you can't make it, I would think it's great if you could find one of your fellow council members to be a substitute or whatnot. I think we need that interaction. That's part of the ordinance, that's part of the bylaws. We need you here. As part of what we were just discussing a minute ago, as far as what the commission can do, what we need to do as far as recommendations, I guess we'd need Mr. Baird's legal input on this, but perhaps there's things that, and this is again where council member, we need your input. You can say, this seems to be a topic that can be delegated to, or the commission has, the ability to act on this or to decide this. Council doesn't want to be bothered with this, that sort of thing. Perhaps that kind of, back and forth would be helpful and address what, was just being discussed. I would like to have somewhat of a discussion about the role of our ex officio members. I think it's probably a little bit unfair that we put the appointed members up and voting members up here on the dais and put everyone else down on the floor. Whether intended or not, I get the impression that, our ex officio members feel like they can't contribute. And I frankly would like to see more contributions from our ex officio members, more than just, when you have a topic on the agenda, a presentation. The appropriateness of that and whatnot, I guess I'd like to discuss further. But I'd like to see more involvement there.
Mr. Lancaster, on that point, and not to put her on the spot, but our longest standing ex officio member, Ms. Tisdale, how do you feel about that, if I may ask?
I'm fine to do that. I do try to chime in if it's something that I am aware of or know something about. I do try to bring that forward, but if you want to hear more, I can do that.
Most definitely. I've interrupted to make that request.
Thank you.
And that's not to leave either one, and Ms. Tayson or Mr. Updike, so. No, fair comments.
And Mr. Chairman, if I can add one more, then I'll stop, I promise. But we have this discussion from time to time, and, it depends on who's in the room at the time that we have the discussion, right? I think that city-wide kind of communications, I think it's appropriate, unless they're urgent matters, right, that communications come through the commission. An example of that we heard in Caleb's report from Sergeant Frazier, that he's been in contact with with Ada County Highway District and ITD about signs for ordinances, right? I think those kinds, and Sergeant Arnold was good about this. He would come to us with topics, and then, as a group, we would decide what action to take, right? We would kind of informally ask ACHD to do certain things, right? So we were kept in the loop. We had involvement. Things kind of came through us. I recognize that there's at times emergencies where, action needs to happen. It can't wait 30 days, right? But there's a lot of things that we do, that we talk about, that aren't urgent matters, right? Whether they happen next week or they happen in 4 weeks, it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. So on a lot of these communications, I would like to continue to ask that they come through the commission. This is what we're here for. And I'm sorry, I have one more, Mr. Chairman. I lied, but this goes along with Commissioner McKinney too.
So when you say a couple, that means three.
Yeah, it
When you say
does.
one, that means two.
It does, yeah. Whatever I say, multiply by 2, I guess, but.
But we're going to be closing this down here in a minute.
I know. So my last comment, and then I'll stop. So Commissioner McKinney talked about this. So our first duty and power, there's a couple words that I'll emphasize on this. Number 1, so receive, review, and make recommendations to the City Council on all Meridian City traffic safety and transportation matters. So I had a little bit of a rant last month, as you may recall, that it seemed like there was at least one ordinance that was discussed and decided without us receiving or being asked to make a recommendation. So that seems to be less than all. So I guess that's my request to our city staff and our city council is, like the communications, that transportation-related decisions also come through the commission for our review and recommendation.
Very good.
I'll stop.
Okay. So, as I want to do, I say, okay, what is our next step then, if we're moving forward? How do we, are you comfortable with waiting for an invitation from Mayor-elect Simonson? You want us to explore when that invitation could happen? I'm just saying, what's the next step, or do we just leave it at this conversation? Or is the next step, do we sit down again and go over these a little more detail and think about it and come up with the things to do?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. McKinney?
I think at this point, the thing to do would be to not take any action until we do meet with the mayor. I think that would be the first step, to talk with the mayor and discuss options and issues and, go through all these things that have been pointed out here tonight and take it from there. So at this point, I think the only thing to do is to try to schedule, or at least identify a time to try to meet with the mayor, perhaps also the city council, but at least the mayor.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Hopkins?
we should at least wait till the mayor-elect actually becomes mayor and then work on it
Yeah.
from
Well,
there.
I'm
true,
think-
that's concrete, but,
Mr. Chairman.
go ahead, Mr. McKinney, I'll cut you off.
No, I think
Mr. Chairman, over here.
Mr. Kavner
Who
has.
doesn't talk very
Yeah.
much. Appreciate the comments, Commissioner Lancaster. A couple of suggestions then. I think one can imagine a new mayor receives a significant amount of invitations to meet one-on-one. The argument about the role of this committee and commission could be debated, but I view you as an extension of the administrative branch. So reaching out to the mayor for an opportunity for potentially the current chair-elect to meet with the new mayor, discuss future vision casting, I think seems incredibly appropriate. At the same time, you have a date on the calendar for an annual update, where I think it would be appropriate to present some of these thoughts and ideas in that February meeting with the new mayor, with the new council. I think many of the recommendations on where this commission is headed is appropriate. I, for one, believe that you should have, I think someone used the word, a bigger bite of the apple. I think that's an appropriate suggestion. And I think at that point, it can be the opportunity for us to discuss how we're going to level up our commission, city council liaison process. I will share with you, as Commissioner Lancaster, this committee knows, I try not to pipe up. I don't want to influence what you have going on. There are other council members that are much more active and engaged, and I think it just pertains to personal view and philosophy. But I think having a level playing field and some expectations for all of our council members, especially with our 3 new ones coming on, seems appropriate. And I've made some notes to share that with our incoming council president, vice president, about what that will look like, because everybody deserves a fair shake. So I appreciate those comments as well. But I think reaching out to the mayor-elect to get on his calendar now or once he's sworn in, as well as planning to present some of these ideas and suggestions in your February meeting would make the most sense.
Very good. Okay. Anything else, commissioners? Okay. We're approaching discussion of bylaws, staff communications. Mr. Hood, should we take a quick motion to carry this over 5 minutes or plow through? We're good? Okay. IB, future meeting topics, signs and city ordinances. We might consider bringing in a sign of a business and get their perspective on it. I'm thinking of, full disclaimer, one of my networking groups, there is a sign company. They work with different jurisdictions. There's some perspectives there. Okay, South Meridian, YMCA, Maine King Crossroad, Mass Mobility. Okay. Next meeting?
Mr.
Is there
Chairman,
anything, excuse me, anything else?
may I suggest another future meeting topic?
Yes, you may.
So there was just released, and I mentioned this earlier, I referred to this earlier, but there was a summary of the 2018 crash data throughout the state, and I thought that that might be useful information for this commission, for us to invite somebody from the State Office of Highway Safety to make a presentation about the 2018 crash or traffic crash data. I would like to see that. It's a suggestion for the commission.
Okay. Mr. Hood, if you'll add that to our task list, if we will. All right, next meeting, January 6th, 2020. And do I have a motion to adjourn unless there's something else to bring before the commission at this time?
So moved.
Okay, it is 5:31. Let's close the meeting and see you next month. Thank you.